We thought the hardest part would be the roof. It came down in one single afternoon. The walls followed, log by log, until all that was left of the old trapper's cabin was the stone footing and a dirt floor that had not felt daylight in more than 100 years. That is where my brother's crowbar caught on something that was not a rock. It was iron. A ring of it, set flush into a slab of cut stone, sitting in the floor of a building that was supposed to be nothing more than a hunter's shelter thrown together somewhere in the 1800s. We worked the slab loose. Cold air rose out of the dark beneath it, steady and old, the way air moves in a cave that has been breathing quietly for a very long time. And under that slab, a set of stone stairs went straight down into the mountain, farther than any light we carried could follow. If you want to see how far down those stairs actually went, and the other places in these mountains where we have since found the exact same thing, subscribe before you go any further. This channel follows these openings all the way to the bottom, no matter what the history books insist is supposed to be there. Hit subscribe, stay with me, and keep watching, because the deeper we went, the less any of this looked like something a frontier trapper could have built with his own 2 hands. Let me back up to how we ended up standing in that cellar in the first place. The land sits in the mountains of western North Carolina, up a gravel road that turns to soft mud every spring, in a fold of the Blue Ridge, where the ridgelines crowd in close and the hollows stay dark until the middle of the morning. My family bought the parcel for the timber and the creek frontage. The cabin came with it, written on the old deed as a hunting camp, dated to the 1850s, tied to a family name the county still had on file. A trapper who ran his lines for pelts through these hollows back when the American chestnut still stood thick across the whole slope, before the blight came through in the early 1900s and killed nearly every one of them. None of us had any real interest in the cabin itself. It was leaning hard to one side, half rotted, the chinking long gone from between the logs, the porch already collapsed into the rhododendron. The plan was simple. Take it down, clear the old footing, and set something new on the same flat shelf of ground. We spent the first morning stripping the roof. Hand-split shakes, grey and curled, most of them crumbling the moment we touched them. Underneath the roof boards we found square nails, the kind a blacksmith would have hammered out one at a time, which fit the story of an old cabin just fine. The walls were chestnut logs, dovetailed at the corners, and even half-rotten they were heavy enough that we had to pull them down with a chain and a truck. A pair of ravens sat on the ridgeline the whole time and watched us work, which my grandmother would have called an omen, though at the time we just laughed at them. By the second afternoon the whole structure was gone, and we were left staring at the footing. That was the first thing that did not sit right. The footing was not the rough stacked fieldstone you expect under a cabin like this. It was cut, squared blocks, fitted so tightly that even after all this time you could not have slid a knife blade between them. There was no mortar. There did not need to be. The stones held each other by their own weight and the precision of their edges, the way the great old walls in far older countries are said to hold. We told ourselves the trapper had simply found good flat rock and done careful work. People underestimate how much patience and skill went into old handwork, we said. A man with a whole winter and nothing but time could do remarkable things. That is what we told ourselves, standing there in the cold, and for about an hour it even sounded reasonable. Then the crowbar found the iron ring, and the story we had been telling ourselves started to come apart. The slab it was set into was a single piece of stone, longer than a man and nearly as wide, dressed flat on every visible face. It took the truck and the chain to lift it, and when it finally swung up on its edge, the smell came up first. Not rot, not the damp musk of an animal den. It was the flat mineral smell of deep stone and standing air, the smell of a place that had been sealed off from the surface for longer than anyone alive could account for. And there were the stairs, cut stone treads, each one worn slightly hollow in the centre the way a step goes hollow only after thousands and thousands of feet have crossed it, spiralling down along the curved wall of a shaft that dropped straight into the mountain. We stood at the top of it for a long time before anyone spoke. You have to understand what that quiet meant. We had come up there to burn an old cabin for firewood and to clear a building site. Now we were looking down a staircase that no map, no deed, no county record, and no living memory had ever mentioned. My brother finally said the only thing any of us were thinking, which was that people did not put spiral stone staircases under trapping cabins, and that whatever this was, it had been here first. We did what anyone would do. We got a rope, tied it off to the truck, took the best flashlight we owned, and we went down. I counted the steps out loud as we descended, and my voice came back to me strange and close, swallowed by the walls the way sound dies in a room built entirely of stone. The shaft was not rough. The sides were the same dressed and fitted stone as the footing above, laid in even courses that ran true and level all the way down. There were no pick marks, no drill scars. None of the ragged, chewed-up evidence you would expect from a shaft hacked out of mountain bedrock by hand with iron tools. Whoever cut this had worked the stone the way a fine cabinet-maker works a piece of walnut, smooth and deliberate and exact, every surface finished as if it mattered that it be finished. At the count of 40 feet, measured later with a tape against the marked rope, the stairs ended on a flat landing, and the shaft opened into something none of us had words for at the time. Before I take you onto that landing, I want to be honest about what we were thinking down there, because it matters for everything that follows. We were not a crew of treasure hunters looking for a mystery. We were 3 tired people with muddy boots who had expected a long weekend of demolition and a good stack of firewood at the end of it, and every ordinary explanation we reached for kept failing against the thing in front of us. A trapper did not need a shaft. A trapper had no tools capable of this. No reason on earth to sink 40 feet of dressed masonry under a one-room cabin in the middle of the woods, and no winter long enough to do it even if he had wanted to. And yet here it was. Older than the cabin. Older than the deed. Older than the name the county had carefully written down in ink more than a century and a half ago. The researchers who study what they call the Old World would tell you this is exactly the pattern to look for. In that reading, the simple wooden structures scattered across these mountains are not the original buildings at all. They are the things that later people put up on top of something far older without ever understanding what was already sitting underneath their feet. The cut stone, the impossible masonry, the shafts and vaulted chambers that keep turning up in places where no frontier settler had any reason to dig. To the people who take this seriously, the trapper did not build any of this. He simply found a good, flat, dry foundation already resting in the ground, and he raised his little cabin on top of it, the same way you might pitch a tent on an old paved lot without once wondering who laid the pavement or why. I am not asking you to accept that yet. I am telling you what was going through my mind on that landing, 40 feet down, with the tool marks that were not there staring back at me out of stone that should not have existed. Before we move on to the next descent, stop for a second. What you just heard about the tool marks on that stone is the part that changes everything. But it only makes sense when you see it written out next to the original survey record. The cut of the stone, the depth of the shaft. It's all in the document linked below. Take 5 seconds right now, grab it, and then come back. Because what comes next builds directly on it. The link is in the description. QR code is on your screen. The landing opened into a chamber, and the chamber is where the trapper story dies for good. It was round, or close enough to round that the difference did not matter, with a ceiling that curved up and inward into a shallow dome overhead. The dome was built from the same fitted stone as everything else, each block tapering just slightly so that the whole ceiling locked itself together and carried its own weight without a single beam, brace, or post anywhere in the room. Anyone who has ever tried to build a true arch knows how much knowledge is hidden inside that shape. It is not something a person stumbles into by accident. It is engineering. It takes drawings, it takes math, and it takes men who have built the thing before and know exactly how the stones want to fall. The floor was dry and dead level under our boots, and set into the far wall, directly facing the bottom of the stairs, was an opening framed in heavy dressed stone that led off into a passage whose end we could not see. There was one more thing in that chamber, and I have gone back and forth on whether to even mention it, because it is the part people are quickest to dismiss. High on the curve of the dome, worn shallow but still there under the flashlight, were markings cut into the stone, not writing, or nothing I could read as writing. They were geometric, straight lines and arcs in a repeating shape that looked, if I am honest, like the outline of an 8-pointed fortress, the kind of star-shaped works that turn up in old maps of towns nobody remembers building. I photographed them. I have shown the photographs to more than one person who spends their life on this, and not a single one of them recognized the marks as anything a settler would carve. In their reading, those shapes are a signature. The same signature, they say, that shows up scratched into old-world stonework from the ridges of Appalachia to the star forts of Europe, left by whoever it was that actually laid these stones. We did not go down that passage the first day. I want to be clear about that, because it is easy, telling this story later, to make the three of us sound braver than we actually were. The truth is that the air drifting out of that passage had a weight to it, a slow, steady coldness that did not feel like the rest of the chamber, and the flashlight beam simply ran out of reach before the walls of the passage ever did. All three of us felt the same thing at the same moment, without needing to say it, which was that we had gone exactly as far as we were meant to go on a grey Sunday afternoon in the mountains, so we climbed back up. We counted the steps again on the way out, just to be sure the depth was real and we had not talked ourselves into it. 40 feet. Then we sat on the pile of chestnut logs that used to be a cabin, and none of us said very much for a long while. Over the following weeks I did what you would do. I pulled the county records. I found the trapper. He was real, an entirely ordinary man by every account that survives, a hunter and a woodsman who worked these hollows for the better part of his life and died in the hard winter of 1871. He is buried a mile down the valley in a small churchyard that is still there, his stone leaning now but still readable if you brush the moss away. Nothing in his life, in anything anyone ever wrote about him, so much as hints that he sank a stone shaft beneath his cabin. His will was short. It listed his traps, a rifle, 2 mules, a cast-iron stove, and a small amount of money owed to him by a neighbour. It did not list a doorway into the mountain. Whatever waits down there was already ancient when he first walked up that hollow with a bundle of traps on his back and decided the flat ground was a good place to build. That is the piece the old-world researchers keep circling back to. Across Appalachia, from the hills of eastern Kentucky to the ridges of North Georgia, there are accounts of the same thing turning up again and again. Squared stone chambers with no builder attached to them, precise masonry, with no maker and no record. Shafts and tunnels that the official histories explain away, one at a time, as root cellars or old mine works, or simply the overheated imagination of country people who found something they could not understand and told stories about it. In this way of seeing the world, all of these scattered things are fragments of one older whole. A civilization that built in dressed stone across this entire region and was then buried, drowned, or swept away in some event that the textbooks we grew up on do not name and do not want to discuss. The settlers who arrived afterward found the high, dry, perfectly built foundations already waiting in the earth, and they did exactly what practical, tired, hopeful people have always done. They built their cabins and their barns and their little white churches directly on top of them, and within a generation or two they forgot completely that anything else had ever stood there at all. There is a name that gets used for the event that supposedly buried all of it, though I use the word carefully, because the moment you say it out loud people stop listening. The mud flood. The idea, as the researchers lay it out, is that at some point not nearly as far back as we are taught, a wave of mud and sediment rolled across huge stretches of the land and swallowed the lower floors of an entire built world. It is the reason, they argue, that so many old buildings in so many old towns have windows half sunk below the modern street, and doorways you now have to step down into, and first floors that behave like basements. In the cities the mud is paved over and forgotten, but out here, in the hollows of Appalachia, there were no crews to dig it out and no city to rebuild. The old work simply stayed where the mud left it, high and dry inside the ridges, sealed under the soil until a chestnut forest grew over the top of it, and a man with a rifle and 2 mules built a cabin on the one flat spot the buried foundation had left him. I am not telling you this is true. I am telling you that standing 40 feet down in dressed stone, with an 8-pointed star cut into the dome above my head, it stopped sounding as crazy as it used to. I've gone back down 3 more times since that first Sunday. I have walked part way into the passage now, far enough to know several things for certain. It keeps going. It branches at least once, into a second corridor that runs off at an angle deeper into the ridge. And the stonework never once gets sloppy, never gives out, never turns into the rough natural cave you keep half expecting it to become. Whoever made it made all of it, with the same steady and certain hand, from the top step under the cabin to the deepest point I have yet reached. I have measured the dome twice to be sure. I have run my bare palm along joints so tight that after all these years, all this weight, all this time, there is still no gap anywhere to catch even a fingernail. And every single time I climb back up into the daylight and stand on that plain, flat shelf of ground where a trapper once threw up 4 log walls and called it a cabin, I understand a little better why the people who study this cannot simply let it go. On the third descent I followed the branch corridor as far as my nerve would take me, and that is where the ground gave up its next surprise. The corridor did not dead end. It opened, without any warning, onto the top of a second staircase. Another spiral, cut from the same stone, dropping away below the first one into a black that my light could not touch the bottom of. I stood at the head of those second stairs and felt the cold air pouring up past my legs, and I did the arithmetic no trapper would ever have needed to do, 40 feet to the first chamber. And then this, going down again, who knows how much farther, under a mountain in the Blue Ridge that every map in the county swears is nothing but rock and root and old chestnut. I threw a small stone down into it and counted, the way you do at the edge of a well, and the sound came back to me later than it had any right to. Whatever this was, it was not a cellar, it was not a mine. It was a way down into something built on a scale that has no place in the history of these hills. Because if the trapper did not build it, and the settlers did not build it, and the records have nothing whatsoever to say about who did, then the only thing left standing is the possibility that something was here in these mountains long before any of the history we were handed in school. Something that worked solid stone the way we work steel. Something that went deep into the ground for reasons we can only guess at from the outside, and then vanished so completely and so thoroughly that all it left behind was the foundation, waiting there under the leaves and the roots and 150 years of fallen chestnut, waiting patiently for a family with a chain and a truck to come along and pull down an old cabin and find the iron ring set into the floor. I do not have the answer for you. I want to be plain about that. I have a shaft that should not exist. I have a domed chamber that no trapper on earth could have built. I have a passage that branches and runs on into the dark, and that I have not yet reached the end of. What I can tell you is that before we left the last time, we set the great slab back down over the opening, exactly where we found it, and we have not yet decided whether to go all the way to the end of that passage or to leave whatever is down there the way it has been for centuries, sealed, patient, quiet under the mountain, breathing its slow, cold breath up through the seams in the stone. People ask me why we do not just call someone, a university, a state archaeologist, a news crew, and the honest answer is that I have watched what happens to these finds when they leave a family's hands. The best case is that a small notice appears in a journal nobody reads, and the site gets reclassified as a curious colonial root cellar, and the star on the dome becomes a scratch made by frost. The worst case is a gate, a fence, and a sign that keeps us off our own land while the questions go quietly unanswered. So for now the slab stays where it is, and the record of it stays here, with you, where at least the questions get asked out loud instead of filed away and forgotten a second time. If you want to be there when we finally follow that passage all the way to its end, that story is coming, and it is not the kind of thing you want to hear about second-hand. Stay with this channel. Keep watching. Because the next time we go down those stairs, we are not stopping at 40 feet, not this time around.